Welcome to another edition of the GM Files. Jim Duquette alongside Bobby Evans, and we are glad to be connected with Jim Leyritz, who, of course, major league career, 13 years at the major league level, and never was drafted by a team. I got to start with that first, Jim, because it's, you went to Kentucky and you were a good college player at Kentucky, and you weren't drafted. And I know there's a lot of scouting directors out there that now are claiming that they were this close to drafting Jim Leyritz. How did Jim Leyritz not get drafted?
Well, it's really a funny story to begin with. I was supposed to be a number one draft pick out of high school. And Barry Larkin was supposed to be the number one guy taken in 1982. And I was supposed to be the second guy out of Cincinnati. And 4 days before the draft, I went out and played tennis, and I fractured my foot. And it was interesting because my dad did not know that I was going out to play tennis, and we had been talking about me getting drafted. And I went out and played tennis. I came back with one of those air casts because it was just a little fracture. I was going to be out 3 or 4 weeks. That's it. And I was going to be able to play, during the summer. But I get home and my dad looks at me and goes, "What did you do?" And I said, "Dad, not a big deal. It's just a fracture." He goes, "Oh, it's a big deal. I just got a phone call from the Atlanta Braves. They're going to make you their draft pick. And they want to know if you're willing to sign or not, because back in those days, you could discuss those things, whether the guy wanted to go to school or not." And my dad said, "Well, listen, when he gets home, I'll talk to him and make us an offer and we'll discuss it." So sure enough, the next day they called back, and a guy named Hep Cronin was the local scout for the Braves. And he called my dad back, and my dad said, "Oh, he fractured the foot, but he's going to be able to play during the summer if you want to take a look at him later." And that's what Hep said. He goes, "Listen, we're not going to waste a pick on him, but we will come back and watch him play at the end of the summer." They came back at the end of the summer. They saw me play in a big tournament. I did great, but the one thing I couldn't do was catch. That's what they wanted me to do, was be a catcher.
Yeah.
And I still couldn't squat on the foot. But they went to my dad and said, "Listen, he looks good, and we'll take him as a hitter because he can hit. And we'll get, what would it take to sign him?" And my dad said, "Give him 10 grand. And they came back the next day and said, "Listen, we only can give him 5 grand. And my dad said, "Screw that, then he's going to college." So I went to a junior college in Georgia so I could get drafted every year, hopefully. And then I went to the University of Kentucky. Never got drafted in any of those years. Even though I had pretty good seasons, I thought, okay. So then I went out to Kansas in the Jayhawk League, and I told the coach out there, if I come out, I want to start catching again. And I went back to catching. And I caught like 3 or 4 games in the NBC tournament out in Wichita. And Bill Livesey came up to me with Doug Melvin and said, "Hey, what are you doing catching?" And I said, "Well, I can catch." And they said, "Not according to your draft card, because your college coach told us you couldn't catch. So we didn't draft you."
Wow.
And they said, "We just saw you catch for 3 days. You want to sign right now?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I had my dad fly out, and we signed 3 days later.
Oh, that's a great one. That's a Bill Livesey classic story, by the way.
Well, here's the best part of that story. So Hep Cronin and Paul Schneider, who was the Brave Scouts that were supposed to sign me, they were sitting in Schuerholz's box in 1996 in Atlanta when I hit the home run. and they told the story at one of the scout meetings about guys that got away. And they said, we looked at each other and we said, "Do not tell Schuerholz, for 5 grand, we could have changed everything."
Oh my God. We got to flesh that out. That's why we're doing this show. Like you hit the home run off of Wohlers.
Mark Wohlers,
and tied the game, and that changed the whole momentum of that World Series.
Well, in the history,
the Yankees were down 2-0, right? At that point, I remember being there. I think the ball hit off the top of the fence, right? Went over. Yeah. You could have been a Brave.
Yeah, that's just it. And that's what my dad continues to tease Hep Cronin, going, "You could have changed history for 5 grand.
Oh my God.
Well, that's incredible. I mean, those are some legends of the game too. I mean, Doug Melvin and Bill Livesey and Snyder. I mean, those are just some legends, and had great careers in the game, and the Braves for a long time. And their stretch of history, may have been very different. All those division championships, but whether it was 5 grand or a tennis match, I don't know which was the chicken, which was the egg. But Jim, we as we do this show, we love hearing about guys going through their career from the start to the finish, and then what they're doing now. But you had so many wonderful moments in your career. You look back on some of the big hits, and it's hard. I'm sure it's hard to pick a favorite. But what was one of the most meaningful impact moments that you had during your career?
Yeah, I always explain it this way. I said that for me personally, my greatest moment, home run wise, was the '95 walk-off against the Seattle Mariners in the playoffs. That I caught all 15 innings of that game. And as I was going up to the on deck circle, Buck Showalter said, "Hey, Leyritz, you're done after this. Mike Stanley's coming in to catch. Make this count." And I hit the home run, the walk-off. We got done. When I finally got back to Buck, I said, "Hey, I made it count, didn't I?" Skip, yeah. So, but as you fast forward to '96, as far as the franchise, as far as what it did for the history of the Yankees, that '96 by far was the most important thing I ever did because, Joe Torre invites me to his dinner every year to kind of explain. 2 years ago, they did a 1998 celebration here in LA for Joe Torre's Safe at Home Foundation. And Joe calls me up and says, "Hey, we're having this '98 thing. We want you to come." And I'm like, "You do realize I was on a losing team that year?"
That's right.
And he goes, I want you to tell the story that if we don't win in '96 and you don't hit that home run and change everything, that if we lose like we did in '97, I'm out of a job. He trades Mariano Rivera. All this stuff would have happened had that '96 team not won and you hit that home run. I want you to tell that story at this dinner. And came down there. And so for that purpose, that '96 team was so important to keep. Because I remember Gene Michael telling me the story that when they lost in '97, George was right in his office and said, "Get rid of Rivera, get rid of Torre. We're done. We're starting over." And Gene Michael said, "Hold, wait a minute, George. We won last year, remember?" And George said, "I'll give him one more shot." And sure enough, '98 wound up being that magical season. Wow. And I happened to be on the losing end with the Padres to those guys in that World Series.
With Bruce Bochy as the manager.
Yes, and one of my favorite managers ever.
No doubt.
If there was ever such an easy guy to play for, it was Bochy.
No doubt.
Those are great stories. So take us back because you mentioned Rivera might have been traded.
Yeah.
There's some doubts. Was there some doubts there about Jeter? That was Jeter's first year was '96. I know defensively there were some questions. I mean, they had some really, really terrific players that you played with coming up, and they seemed to always make the right decision on who they would keep and who they would trade. Right? They kept Bernie Williams and they had Gerald Williams, and Gerald ended up moving on.
Right.
Like they kept Andy Pettitte, but Sterling Hitchcock moved on. It was just remarkable how they were able to do that. But I mean, for that home run that you talked about, I mean, that could have changed some history there.
Well, there's a lot of things that happen that you look back in the past and go, wow, if this didn't happen, that didn't happen. I think the biggest thing as far as the Jeter situation goes and Derek Jeter happening, I always say every time there should be a celebration for Jeter, Tony Fernandez should be invited. Because if Tony Fernandez doesn't break his wrist, Derek Jeter doesn't start the '96 season in the big leagues and then go on that run and go on becoming the next Yankee shortstop. So I think that's, there's certain things like that happen that, and again, for me, I always complained to my managers and my coaches that I wanted to play more. I wanted to be that everyday guy. And I look back now and I go, gosh, if I would have been, I wouldn't have had these moments because I wouldn't have been sitting on the bench to be able to come off the bench to do these things. Wow. So you look back on those things. Some of it's good managing and good front office work, but also a lot of it's dumb luck too.
Very true. Very true. Well, the game today is a little different, Jim. We're seeing more and more situational players or situational pitching and at bats and circumstances with the shift that affect the left-handed hitter maybe more so than anybody in the game right now. What's your take on today's game, and what do you foresee 2021 looking like, and what most excites you?
Well, what most excites me is we're finally hiring people like Tony La Russa again that are true baseball people. I love the analytics. The analytics are great. I think it's a great tool. But I don't think it's the end all be all. And I think to the point of where you're having managers now being run by, their game is being run by a computer and not by the feel of the game. I mean, you heard A-Rod, of course, being on Fox and doing things saying, listen, I want to see more of, guys actually watching the game and making decisions. I mean, Don Zimmer's rolling over in his grave right now with some of these things that go on, because Zimmer would sit there and go, "Hey, Jimmy, when you go out next inning, throw a pitch up and into this guy. Let's see how he reacts. Let's see what he does." There's no stat that can tell you that, and so to me, you still got to go with some of the feel of the game, despite some of these analytical statistics. But the other thing that I'll tell you, and Jim, you'll probably agree with me here, is when I was a hitter playing, okay, I had some power. I could hit a home run too, but there was a situation where when I would go up to bat, if there was a hole anywhere in the infield, I was trying to hit the ball through that hole. It wasn't a matter of, the whole side of an infield being wide open. I mean, that's what we did when we were kids, and we didn't have enough people to play the game. It's like, yeah. But so for me, it would be hard to be a hitting coach now and not being able to teach my hitters to hit through that side of the field and say, you know what, start hitting it over there, and eventually you'll get those gaps back again. And I'd like to see more of that happen.
You might have been listening to my show today. We were talking about that today, just how it drives me nuts, the full conscious guys and hitting against the shift, or that part of it's changed a lot.
Yeah, I watched a guy like Teixeira when he came to the Yankees, who was a 350, 320 hitter and spraying the ball all over with power to all fields, comes over to the Yankees and he sees that little short porch and gets to a point where these guys are throwing him fastballs out and away with the whole side of the infield open that he used to just drill the ball through. He couldn't even do it anymore. And it was just tough to watch stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, with the Yankees, let me go back to the top three guys that you played with. It's hard to rank. It's hard to narrow it down. But without getting, I mean, and there's probably three that people don't remember that you played against that were just as good. But which three come to your head the quickest?
Well, Don Mattingly was my favorite teammate ever. I was with him for 5 years, and I've never seen a more not just a superstar, but a more humble superstar. A guy that, when I first got called up, my locker was right next to him. And the first thing he said to me is, "Hey, kid, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid." That's because that's the biggest mistake most young kids make, is they're afraid to ask. He said, "I'm here." And I mean, I remember, we used to sit in the hotel bar at night and talk. I learned more about hitting and the game and things that just sitting around with a bunch of guys talking about baseball, which I think they miss that today. But Donnie would be my number one guy. Derek Jeter, obviously, for what he did. Yeah. And then, most people might, Bernie Williams, to me, was the most underrated and most forgotten player when all of a sudden they did the core four and they forgot Bernie Williams. Because Bernie was one of those guys that just went out every day and performed and was probably, besides not having a very good arm, every other tool that he needed, he had. And he was a big part of those teams throughout the 90s.
That's awesome. Well, you jump ahead to the current day, and we were looking at, as the Giants, we were trying to acquire Giancarlo Stanton. We were neck and neck with St. Louis, and we didn't know if he would accept a trade to us or if he'd accept a trade to St. Louis. But we kept hearing there was another team in the background. And I remember talking to Cashman, and I was like, Cash, you think the Red Sox are going to get him? And he said, "I sure hope not. I hope you get him." And the next thing I know, there's a Twitter feed and there's an announcement, and it's not by your typical PR guy. It's not MLB Network. It's you, Jim Leyritz, breaks the news. Giancarlo Stanton to the Yankees.
So this is a great story. So a buddy of mine, I was at a cigar bar in New York, in Long Island, and a buddy of mine calls me up from a restaurant in Miami, and he says, "Hey, Are you trying to get back into baseball, to broadcasting?" Because, I had a little hiatus there for a while that I was gone. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Yeah, I'm still plugging away, trying to get back in there." He said, "Well, I have something that might help you." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I'm at a restaurant and Giancarlo Stanton's agents are here, or somebody that's connected to him. And they talk that he's taking the deal to New York." He said, "You think that'll help you?" And this was 8:00 at night. I think it was a Saturday night, 8:00 at night. And all of a sudden I was like, "You swear to God, because I'm going to put this out there and I don't want to look like an idiot." And he's like, No, it's done. It's done. So I sure enough put it out, and I got a phone call. There was a Yankee party for all the what do they call those guys? The bleacher creatures that for the Yankee, the Yankee faithful. They were all at a party that night, and I knew a bunch of them. I used to go sit out there and do the roll call with them. And they texted me away, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Is this true?" And I said, "Yes, 100%. It's done. It's a done deal." And then I would get, because I wasn't hashtag back then, I would get these things. "It's not Leyritz, it's somebody else." I'm like, "No, it's me. Really, it's me." And then it's funny. So I wake up the next morning, and at 7 a.m., I had a message left on my phone, and it was, "Hey, Jim, Harold Reynolds here. How in the heck did you get this news before guys like, Kenny and all these guys would give their firstborn? How did you get this news first?" And wow. I called him back, and I told him, I said, "You know what? It's just a matter of being in the right place at the right time."
Pretty good.
That's great. How close, Bobby? How close were the Giants? Were they ever close to getting Stanton?
Well, I mean, we had a deal. We had a deal, just like the Cardinals had a deal.
Yeah.
But right. it was pending Stanton's approval, and we were going to put him in the middle of our lineup, and he looked at our lineup and looked at the Yankee lineup. I think he knew there was a big difference in that ballpark and our ballpark. I think he knew it was good for him.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe the DH too, right? I mean, he'd have that ability.
DH, for sure.
DH down the road, yeah, for sure. I'm curious when, like, some of the biggest postseason home, like I think of George Springer right now, and he's how good of a postseason hitter he is, right? Jim, you had some unbelievable postseason moments, right? We talked about the home run off of Wohlers. You talked, being on the field there with the Mariners and the walk-off there. I think was there one against Randy Johnson that you hit? Yeah,
I had 4 for the Padres.
Oh yeah, for the Padres, right. So Randy Johnson, talk about that one if you would, the Randy Johnson one.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that I get traded over to the Padres in '98, and they all talk about, hey, we got you because of the postseason, and we go, and all of a sudden, it was in September. It was right before September 1st. The Houston Astros traded for Randy Johnson, and we were in Houston playing the Astros at that time. And I remember coming down to the lobby, and Trevor Hoffman and Kevin Brown, and they're all ticked off. They're like, "How can they get him and we didn't get him? Because we should have got him." And now
that was a big trade.
Oh, huge!
Really, I mean, it was Carlos Guillen and Freddie Garcia and John Halama. That was a major trade.
Major trade, and it was every expert said, "Okay, that's it. The Astros are going to win the World Series this year, and they're going to give the Braves a run for their money." And then so we're all talking about that, and then sure enough, we end up opening against them the first round, and Randy pitches the first game, and I had a sacrifice fly. Should have been a grand slam, just missed it in the old Astrodome. The ball wasn't carrying, wound up being a sacrifice fly, and we ended up going on to win game. That game, Kevin Brown strikes out 16, and then game 2 we play, and they're ahead 4-3 in the 4-2. Going into the 9th inning, and they bring in Billy Wagner to close it out. And I come off the bench as a pinch hitter, and I hit a 2-run homer off Billy Wagner to tie the game up. And then we end up losing in the bottom of the 9th. And then we go to San Diego. The next night, game 3, they bring in Scott Earlton to face me, and I thought they were going to pinch hit Wally Joyner for me. And Bochy's like, "No, you're hot. Go." And I end up hitting a game-winning home run off him to put us ahead. Wind up being the game go ahead RBI, and we win that game 2-1. And the next day, my best friend Tommy Brenneman was doing the TV game for Fox, and Tommy and I grew up together in Cincinnati. And he comes and talks to me before the game, and he said, "Hey, man, you've been swinging the bat like crazy. What's going on?" I said, "Listen, I didn't want to talk about it, but I'm taking Johnson deep today." And sure enough, first time up, I hit the home run off Johnson. And it was just a great run to go on. And then against the Braves in the next series, I hit one off Denny Nagle. And it was just one of those things that, the postseason was good to me. But I always say this. Everybody always asks me, "Jimmy, what was it like?" Because you always were in big moments. You seem like you rose to the occasion all the time. And I said, "Well, you know what? I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio with a guy named Pete Rose. Yeah. And when I was a 13, 14, and 15-year-old kid, I went with Tommy to spring training. We were bat boys. And I remember as a 14-year-old kid sitting with Pete, talking about hitting, talking about what he does. And I said to him, why are you so good? Because back then he was Mr. Clutch, you know? And I asked him, I said, how do you not get caught up as a 14-year-old kid? How do you handle these things? He said, Jimmy, I take the first at bat in spring training, no different than the last at bat of the World Series. He said, if I treat each at bat as the most important, no matter what the situation around me, I'm not going to get caught up in it. And I think I took that as a 14, 15-year-old kid. And that was my approach to basketball, wanting the last shot, to, you know, baseball, being up when the game was on the line. I think that was my part of my mentality that I was raised with the advice with a guy like Pete Rose.
That's awesome.
It's a good story.
Jim, so all the years with the Yankees, 97 comes, and from there, you spent about half a season, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 4 straight seasons with, 5 different clubs, like the Anaheim, Texas, Boston, Padres, Yankees, Dodgers. I mean, a lot of different. How did you cope with that, you know, being the player you are and transitioning like that, having been so long a Yankee, now you're bouncing, you know, quite a few spots?
Well, you know, it was interesting because as much as I didn't want the trades, I was being traded to teams that were going to the playoffs. And, you know, it's not such a bad thing to have that reputation of, hey, let's get this guy. And, you know, if we get to the playoffs, he's going to take us through. And I remember when I got traded to the Padres, the first thing that, you know, because Sterling Hitchcock was there from 95 with the Yankees, I was his personal catcher. He tells everybody in the locker room, well, we got Leyritz, watch what happens, you know? Wow. And then I get traded to the Angels in 97. And of course, Langston was there when I was at the Padres and gave up the home run to Tino. But he tells all the Angels, hey, we got Leyritz coming in. That means we're going to the playoffs. I think the only shocking trade that happened is when the Angels did trade me, because I thought they gave me a 3-year deal when they signed me. And I went and bought a house in Anaheim Hills and thought I was going to be there for 3 years. And all of a sudden I get a phone call while I'm in Cleveland from Tim Meade, and we're getting ready to go to the field. And Tim says, hey, by the way, you might want to, you know, pack your bags because we just traded you to Texas. And I said, what are you talking about? This was my first time I was a full-time catcher getting an everyday position. And he says, yeah, he said, and I said, Tim, you got to be kidding me. I can't go to Texas. Pudge is the catcher there. And he said, well, no, Jimmy, he said, they're trading Pudge. And I said, oh, okay, so I'm going to be the starting catcher there. And I said, tell me the situation. He said, you're going to go there. You're going to be the starting catcher. They're trading Pudge because Pudge won't sign his contract because he was a free agent that year. They said they're trading Pudge to the New York Yankees for Jorge Posada.
Wow.
So the deal gets done. Okay, and if you look it up, you can Google it. You can look up Pudge possibly being a Yankee in 1997, before he became a Yankee 10 years later. He tells the story that he got off the plane and Juan Gonzalez told him, hey, Leyritz got traded here. You know, he's coming, you're gone. And Pudge went in the next day and sat down and talked to the ownership and said, hey, I don't want to leave. So here's the situation for me. I'm on a plane on my way to Texas thinking I'm going to be the starting catcher. I get off the plane. I get my bag off the tarmac. They have a car picking me up. And the guy driving me, the clubhouse guy, says, hey, welcome to Texas, man. Glad to have you. He said, did you hear the good news? I said, what's that? They said, Pudge re-signed. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Oh, so man. Johnny Oates was the manager back then. So I go right to the field. I walk right into his office. I said, Johnny, what's up? He said, Jimmy, I am so sorry. He said, we thought this was a done deal. Posada was going to come here. You were going to mentor him for the next year or two. And then we were going to make you into a DH, first base. You know, you were going to be here for a few years. I don't know what to tell you, but you're probably going to – I can get you some at-bats at DH and first base. And, you know, Mickey Tettleton and Will Clark were hurt at the time. He said, you know, this will happen. But I can't – you know, you're not going to catch. And so it was pretty disappointing. So the offseason came, and that's when I asked for a trade to the Red Sox.
Right.
And I got traded to the Red Sox. But then I had an issue with Joe Kerrigan because Joe wanted to call all the pitches. And I was like, Joe, I've been catching for 7 years in the big leagues. I'll work with you, but this is not college. You can't. And I said, and you have Pedro Martinez, Brett Saberhagen and Tim Wakefield in your starting rotation. And I understand Derek Lowe and John Wasden were new guys. We'll talk about that. We'll work together. But no, I'm not doing – well, Jimmy Williams gave Joe the reins and said, if you don't want – if you won't let him call pitches, then Jason Varitek, who was his first year, will become the starting catcher. And so that happened. I became the right-handed DH with Reggie Jefferson from the left side. And by June came around, I had 120 at-bats. And I said, guys, this isn't working. And sure enough, we ended up making the trade to the Padres, and we go on that run with the Padres. So all the trades, even though it was difficult on the family, for me, it got better and better because I went to the World Series with the Padres. They traded me in 99 back to the Yankees. I go back to the World Series. I hit the home run off who was it? Terry Mulholland, which became the last home run of the century in Game 4 of the 99 World Series.
Yeah.
And, just having those moments. And I remember Joe Torre, because when I got traded back to the Yankees in 99, I had just broke my hand. And I couldn't hit a ball out in batting practice. And Jeter and Knobloch and those guys were making fun of me. And they're like, dude, what happened to you? You and Strawberry used to put on these big home run displays in batting practice. You can't even hit a ball out. And I said, guys, I'll hit one when it counts. And I didn't hit one that entire year. And then I pinch hit for Strawberry in Game 4 off Mulholland, and I hit a home run. And as I was rounding the bases and I come into the dugout, Jeter and Knobloch stand up and go, are you kidding me? And I'm like, hey, I told you I was going to do it when it counted. And it gave us a 3-run lead. And then Mariano went out there and closed it out.
That's great.
How about so 99, right? Yankees, 2000, Yankees, Dodgers.
Dodgers, yeah.
So you were around Joe Torre a lot. You're around Bruce Bochy. Give us the differences between the two, or the similarities.
Well, the similarities were great. I mean, they were both catchers, former catchers. They both managed, Torre was a little different because he was American League. In the American League, if you weren't playing that day, you weren't in the lineup. And so there wasn't a lot of pinch hitting going on in the American League lineups with the DH. And so it was a little bit different playing for Joe. The thing I loved about Bochy was, he's like, listen, Leyritz, tomorrow when you come to the ballpark, you got to be ready to play every day here because you can play 5 different positions and you can pinch hit at any time, and double rotations and things like that. So for me, it was kind of nice because I didn't have to go complain to the manager every day if I wasn't in the lineup, because there was a chance with the National League that I was going to be in that lineup at some point every single day. And for me, it was a little bit more fun. But as far as the similarities go, they were both very even keel managers. They never got too high, too low. I think one of the advantages that Torre had over Bochy was, and not to take anything away from our bench coach with the Padres, but Don Zimmer sitting next to Joe Torre. That combination of Joe Torre knowing how to manage people, egos, and things like that, and then Don Zimmer giving him the advice on the baseball side and the game situations, there was no better combination than Joe Torre and Don Zimmer I've ever seen in baseball.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more, Jimbo. I'll ask you one more. Bobby, you might have one more, but I want to ask you in terms of, so I asked you earlier about, the best guys that you played with, right, on the Yankees. So give me 3 guys you played against, best you played against that stand out.
Yeah, to me, the greatest player I ever played against of all time was Barry Bonds.
Right. Right.
There was, especially being a catcher, trying to figure out how to pitch to him and where his weaknesses were, and trying to set things. I mean, this guy was, we used to tease him. I always used to tell him, dude, what's it like playing Nintendo? I mean, he was that good. And before any of the accusations or anything else, this guy was heads above one of the greatest players I've ever seen. I put Roger Clemens on that same category. Again, one of the greatest pitchers I've ever seen. And not only just that, is to watch Roger Clemens workouts in between his starts. He did these Navy SEAL programs that I had never, ever seen before. That I would be like, if I did that, I couldn't walk for a week. This guy did them on a daily basis. And I think that to me was the amazing part of, when people say, oh, well, he did this. Listen, even if he did, he still worked harder than anybody else I've ever seen in the game of baseball. So I would say that would be my number 2. And then Tony Gwynn. Tony Gwynn was the most natural, most prolific hitter I've ever played in. And I was fortunate, Jimmy, during my time, and Bobby, during my time, to play with Wade Boggs, Don Mattingly, and Tony Gwynn, and be in their hitting groups and learn and watch how they went about their business to make myself a better hitter. I couldn't be more blessed to be able to watch those guys over the seasons that I got to be in their hitting groups. So those 3 guys, to me, were that I played against or played with, were guys that I would put right up on those pedestals.
Well, it's probably ideal to finish with that, but I do want to ask you about your batting stance. I know from the right side, just the uniqueness of it. I don't know, was that something that you picked up on at a young age, or something that you changed over time?
No, that was when I broke the foot.
Oh, okay.
And the scout said, we're going to come watch you at the end of summer. I told my dad, I don't want to miss any time. Put a cast on my foot and let me take batting practice every day. And so it was my left leg. I couldn't put pressure on it. So I took batting practice with a stiff leg, and it just became, just a natural thing for me to start to keep doing it.
Wow. That's awesome.
That's how that started. It's funny because, I used to teach lessons and teach kids all the time. And once in a while, my son still does it. I work with him, and the parents are like, can you teach my kid to hit like you? And I go, if you want to break his leg, yeah, sure, we'll do it.
Perfect. That's outstanding. Some great stories, Jim. Really, we appreciate the time. It's nice to catch up with you again. You and I almost ended up on the same team with the Mets back in 2001. Yeah. Unfortunately, that didn't end up coming to play. Was there one team that you kind of go back to and you go, oh man, I wish I had got a chance to play there? As you had opportunities, as Bobby mentioned, it was 6 teams, I think it was total.
Yeah.
Is there one team you're like,
I mean, everybody, well, I watched Barry Larkin. Barry and I grew up, we were teammates growing up with the Midland teams out of Cincinnati, and we were roommates for 4 years. To play in my own hometown would have been kind of cool. To play for the Cincinnati Reds, I grew up with the Big Red Machine. I mentioned earlier I went to spring training as a bat boy, and then watching Barry and Craig Gifford Jr. coming back to Cincinnati. I think that might have been one nice thing that if I would have spent some time there. With all of my family still lives, my brother, my sister, my mom and dad still live in Cincinnati. That might have been a neat thing to have on my resume to play at my own hometown.
That's awesome.
Sure.
Good call.
Sure. Well, listen,
good call.
We appreciate the time today. I know you've got a lot of things going on, off the field with whether it's your title company. You got a company obviously going on with the BioPlanet. You were telling us before you came on. You got a podcast coming down the pike too. So anything we can help on promoting that, let us know for sure.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, we're going to be starting it's kind of a sports business type of thing. It's going to be charity related. It's going to have a charity component to it, which is something that I do. I never do something without that.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And like I said, I'm hoping to get back to baseball so I can get back to New York and do my appearances at Yankee Stadium, because we miss being at the games. We miss being with the fans. And we're hoping that 2021 we can get back to
no doubt.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll hope to run into you there, of course, this summer once we're able to travel safely, Jim. So thanks again for the time. We really appreciate it. Bobby and I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
All right, guys, stay safe and God bless.